You're listening to Sense and Sustainability. This is the podcast series for everything to do with sustainable supply chains. So welcome to our regular series of podcasts, Sense and Sustainability, where we try to interview people and talk to people that are inspirational around the world and have done some work around the whole subject of sustainable procurement. And I'm delighted today to introduce Sanjay Kumar from India. I've known for quite some time and has been doing some fantastic work in this space. So Sanjay, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Son, for inviting to the school. And I hope that we're really learning a lot from the school.
Thank you. So, Sanjay, a lot of our listeners are kind of quite interested in people's careers and their backgrounds and how they became involved in sustainable procurement. Can you tell us a little bit about you and how you got to where you are and how you built your passion for sustainable procurement?
That's a really nice question. So I have a background in environmental engineering. I did masters in environmental engineering, and then I got into the services. So once I joined the service, I was allotted the procurement division, and I was responsible for carrying out procurement in the railway systems. So I worked in the railway system for 4 5 years, six. Then I started thinking, what next? Because career is becoming, a kind of a dull. So I took sabbatical and decided to do another master sponsored by government of India. And that was on public policy and sustainable development. So as a part of this course, I went to Texas University, US, and also to Yale, New Haven, Connecticut. It was about the time when we were finishing the course in Texas. Then we had to come back and give a proposal for the thesis, which was required for doing the completion of the master degree. So I was just looking around here and there, what topics should I do? What topics should I select for doing my thesis, right? And I absolutely had no idea about there is something called green procurement. I knew about there is something called green finance. I knew about there is something called green economy, but absolutely no idea about the green procurement. So one day I was sitting in the library and I just Googled green procurement. And I saw, several entries on the green procurement. That delighted me. And when I started going through it, it really interested me that, okay, I have a background in environmental engineering, and now I am doing public policy and system development. And I have professional experience in procurement. So why don't I work, intersection of these two? And that is how I got into the green procurement. I did my thesis and submitted it, got the master degree. But then I continued working on this subject. That was the difference because many people did the master and they left it there. But somehow, I was interested in this subject and I took forward, and that is how I'm here today in green procurement.
That's an amazing story. Thank you. So you two master's degrees, one in environmental engineering and one in public policy and sustainable development. And you've done a bit of procurement, so you kind of brought the whole thing together.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds quite similar to my career path, actually. I was a procurement guy by background. And then eventually, as the business I was working in was looking more and more at sustainability issues, I sort of became the sustainability guy. And it's interesting how we sort of plot a path for our careers. It doesn't always work out exactly the way that we expect, but it's interesting that you obviously had, kind of a long-term vision here, albeit you're never quite sure how things are going to pan out. And thanks to Google.
Thanks to Google because Google was responsible for opening my eyes to the world of green procurement, and slowly when I started working on right, so that was sometime in 2006, 2007, long back. So very people will talk about sustainable procurement or green procurement in this part of the world in India because economy was the most prevalent and most important point. So they said, what is this all about? But slowly, when we started discussing, having discussion, having conversation with the people, they also understood. And slowly I get an opportunity to get connected with the other people from the other parts of the world. And one more story I want to tell you here that is also very important because when I came back from Texas to finally back to India and I had to do the thesis. So when I said, I want to work on this subject, they said, like, who is going to guide you? Right. So if you want to work on this subject, find out the, a supervisor for you. right? So that was again challenging. I looked at internet again, search in different universities in India, but I was not able to get. Finally, I got hold of a professor working in Dresden University in Germany, Professor Gunther, and she agreed to guide me and support me in this thesis. So that's how I could complete my thesis on Kinpaka.
Wow. Yeah, because around about that time, there weren't really many experts in sustainable procurement. This was about the time that I started my business in 2006, and really nobody was doing it. In fact, it's the reason I started Action Sustainability because I was part of the Sustainable Procurement Task Force in the UK, and I used to go to these big government meetings where there'd be like 40 people around the table, of which 3 had ever bought anything. They were sort of more general events, talking about policy and all this stuff. And I was thinking, well, there's so much talk about this now in government, but there isn't any help out there for anybody to do it. So I packed my job in, I started Action Sustainability, and here we are. So yeah, we kind of we obviously fell into this sort of subject at around about the same time. So Sanjay, you've written a book. You're one of very few people. You're practically unique in this, I think, and you've actually written a whole book on sustainable procurement. Would you like to tell us about it?
Yeah.
What inspired you to do this?
Okay, well, a couple of things because I said like I was working in this field. So if you look at the literature available on this subject, right? So all this literature they are either focus on from the has been written from the point of view of a researcher who's working in the academia or practitioners or sometime policy, but there are not much literature available which focuses on this subject holistically from point of view of researcher, practitioner, policymakers, right? So this was the one point. And the second point was, if you look around the literature available, there are a number of reports, case studies, information available in the systems. But majority of those literatures comes from experience of implementing sustainable public procurement in the developed countries, mostly from the Europe. There are very limited literature which are coming from now it has started coming, but still there are very few in numbers coming from the global south. So as a result, what is happening is the dominant view about the sustainable public procurement is the one which is practiced in developed countries. And what is happening at the ground level in many of the countries contain the transition to development, those views are not getting reflected. Those views are not coming into the mainstream. This is challenge for the SPP communities. So again, many of the countries they have matured, right? Many countries are wonderful in terms of implementation of sustainable procurement. When you look at the literature, you don't find some kind of report or assessment which says that okay, when this particular country, say for example, Germany started their journey, what were the challenges they faced, how they solved those challenges and addressed those challenges, and how they have moved from one stage to the other stage and so on. So another important thing, even the dominant view about the sustainable public procurement, that is still to be grounded in realities and evidences. Say for example, when you say that sustainable products are on a long-term basis they're cheaper, right? But how many examples you find in which sustainable products are cheaper? There are not much evidences, but still we as an advocate, we say that okay, if you take the life cycle cost of a product or service, it will work out to be cheap. This is a theoretical construct and which appeals, no doubt. But in practice, in how many times we have been able to establish this? Very few concrete examples, I'll tell you. So these were the things, and those things were in my mind. And I was discussing with some of our colleagues with whom I was working, not from India, but from the other parts of the world. So why don't we, we write the book, right? Finally, just before the COVID, I thought, okay, let me try, because I had never written a book. Honestly, small papers or a small policy brief and so on, but never a book attempted. I have attempted in the past. So I wrote to Springer Nature and said, okay, look, this is what I am doing. I do not have a PhD degree, but I have experience. I've been working in this field for some time, and this is what I want to write. And they agreed. And luckily, we entered into 2020 and we had a COVID. I had abundant time to write about. So I utilized those 2 years, and finally I was able to put my thoughts in the form of a book. So now the book, they have come up with the flyers, and shortly, by September, October, it is going to come in a print. So I'm really delighted and looking forward to it.
Wonderful. So this is one of those COVID premiums. You managed, because of lockdown, you managed to find time to sit and write a book. That's fantastic. You mentioned, the developments in the global south, and, a lot of the academic papers, are related obviously to the developed world. And particularly when I talk to people around the world, sustainable procurement is often seen very much as a European thing. Does your book focus mostly on experience in the global south, or have you looked at the world at large?
No, the book has 7 chapters, right? So the first chapter is basically an introduction about the procurement, how such procurement evolved, and the real chapter starts from the chapter 2, in which I have discussed how the public procurement was perceived by the stakeholders, right, and how our ability to deliver more than what is required from the procurement professional has changed the perception of the procurement profession. They are not able to deliver only the goods or works or services which is immediately required, but they are also able to deliver, the broader sustainability goals, national goals. So that has changed the perceptions. So how it has, actually come out. So I have covered a history of very briefly from the past, how it has happened, and how green procurement came into the picture, and then how sustainability, social parts came into the picture. If you remember, social issues that was very much was in the focus in the 19th century, even the UK, USA, and France, when they started focusing on the employment, labor side, and so on, right? But slowly, when we moved forward, right, people started criticizing you if you are focusing on the social issues like local job creation or giving benefit to the SMEs or local industries, then you are hurting trade, right? Those kind of things, right? But slowly we know that, okay, now we came from the social, then we started talking about the eco innovations, environmental goods, and then benefit to the environment. Then we again, fortunately, we have completed the cycle. Again, we are talking about the social values and so on. So it has taken a whole cycle. And I also talk about the value for money, how the understanding about the value for money has changed the perception about focusing on environment and social values are important to societies, because after all we are spending money, and if we are not focusing on this value, that means our society or our people are going to pay excess somewhere, additional cost somewhere, right, which is much more than what we been focusing on the environmental society and economy together, right? And so second chapter is all about the evaluation and giving a solid understanding about the sustainable public procurement. Quite long discussion about on that. So second chapter was basically about, evolution of the sustainable public procurement, the value for money concept and how it is grounded in the modern thinking of a strategic procurement. And the third chapter is about how sustainable public procurement is it's actually happening in the most part of the world. And when I say the most part of the world globally, honestly, I have focused only on Europe and China. Why I have chosen Europe and why I have chosen China is very relevant, because in fourth chapter I'm talking about the status of sustainable public procurement in India and how we are going to implement sustainable public procurement in India. Fourth and fifth, sixth chapter. So the third chapter I have chosen Europe because European countries, they have been at the forefront in implementing sustainable public procurement, and learning from what is happening in the European Union is very much important, whether those could be replicated in India or not. And I chose China because China is again very big in size. Something like, India, their economy, Indian economy almost compete with each other in many of the areas. So China was again a focus area, how they have been able to implement sustainable procurement. So the learning from this experience, what is happening in Europe and what is happening in China, those has been taken into input for developing the strategy. Finally, in the sixth chapter of the of the book. So all these chapters are interrelated, you can say, right? So fourth chapter is again about what is the national context for implementing sustainable public procurement in India. It just talks about the national context in the sense that why we should do in India. Because every countries they have chosen to implement sustainable public procurement, they found a reason. Okay, I want to adopt it. So India should also have the reason. So what are those reasons? So fourth chapter is about that. Then the fifth chapter is about legislative and institutional framework, public policy frameworks in India. In great detail again, I have spoken about, written about, the origin, constitution, what was, how procurement, some of the regulations, because some of the things were prevalent in those times are still prevalent now. So how those things have come up and how are helping the procurement. So again, I have discussed on the social legislation, then on the environmental legislation, and I focus on only those legislations which have an impact on procurement decision. Say, for example, when I'm talking about we have a MSME Act, we call, so it has an impact on procurement. Similarly, we have a act on Make in India. So, what is the impact on procurement? How these two are going to be linked together? Because the problem with the current legislation in India is they don't speak with each other. They appears to be working in silos. Like Make in India policy will work in silos, procurement policy will work in silos. If we have a regulation on, say, we have a regulation on e-waste, we have a regulation on solid waste, we have a regulation on construction and demolition rates, but again in silos. So how do we make our legislation to work together and make them talk to each other? Right. So that I have taken. And the sixth chapter is about basically, I've been taking several of the training session to professionals from the different sectors, right? So almost for the last 10 years, you can say, one of the favorite things I'll do during my class is I'll do the SWOT analysis of implementing SPP in India. So people will participate on the seat, will club and tell the results. Okay, this is the result of the SWOT analysis. What are the our strength for implementing SPP? What are the weaknesses? How we can use the opportunity, and what are the threats and all. So yeah, I have looked at, and surprisingly, for the last 10 years, I'm getting the same result of the SWOT analysis. This shows that basically, inherently people knows what are our strength, what are our weaknesses for implementing SPP in India, right? And where are the opportunity, right? They know, but somehow we have not been able to take it forward. And I also discussed SPP journey in India, since beginning, almost since 2006 onwards to the last 15 years journey. And what are the initiative at the national level which we have taken to implement sustainable public procurement? And what are the learning from those failure, although we have not been able to develop a quite structured program, but many things are happening, right, in a decentralized way. And the challenge is how do we take it forward, right? So based on this SWOT analysis and understanding experiences, good experience from the Europe and China, presented a SPP policy for India, and I have presented a roadmap for India. If India really want to adopt, they can do some tweaking in the draft I have proposed, and they can go ahead with that draft. So this is what the implementing strategy for implementing SPP in India. So there are 10 blocks the strategy consists of. It's a generic in nature, which could be adopted by any country if they want. And there are 5 strategy which I especially focus based on the context, prevailing context in India. So 5 strategy which can work in any countries, like obviously decentralized approach. In the sense, I'm saying that not only need to focus on top-down approach for implementing SPP, but also give enough flexibility to the people, who are able to apply those concepts wherever they work. So top-down and bottom-up approach. And the second is professionalization of procurement, right? What do I do? Like you come up with any legislation, it's not going to work unless the people, real people, who have to implement the sustainable public procurement, they are trained. They are able to identify the opportunity. They are able to integrate sustainability concept at the different stages of the procurement cycle. It will not happen, right? Let's focus on that. And I believe third is science-based approach. In the sense, talk about any government or any businesses, they are clueless. Like, what is their sustainability impact? And today, nowadays, it's very fashionable to talk about the carbon neutral or net zero. But if you talk to any business or talk to any government, what is your impact? Tell me what is impact. They don't have idea. At the best, they will tell you the direct impact. They will not talk about the scope 3 emission which is happening. And we as a government or as a organization, like we have to take care of the scope 3 emission to become carbon neutral. Otherwise, how do we become that? So I've said about adopt science-based approach, data driven, like based on the fact, what is your baseline and measure your performance and so on. And the fourth one is collaboration, right? So sustainable public procurement. So if you think that is a procurement agenda, it's not going to work. If you think that it is sustainability agenda or environmental people can lead and drive, not going to work. So social guys, if they're tied with that, it is all about the social values. So we want to take lead and take it forward. It's not going to work. So we have to collaborate internally, and we have to collaborate externally. Externally in the sense with the vendors, because who is the most affected people, other than the procurement people. If we apply the sustainable public procurement, it is the vendor, right? They are the most affected. Their business are impacted because once we started demanding the ticketing sustainability criteria, so collaborate with them. That is, they are going to help you. So I think, and the fourth one is like obviously the enabling framework, in the sense, especially the procurement is driven by regulation, and regulation in different parts of the world is a different. So we have to understand what is reasonably permissible or what is reasonably accepted in a particular countries. So work on those regulation, in the sense, if there are gaps that need to be covered. So regulation and regulatory framework is very important. So these five are, which could be taken up by any countries, whoever, wherever, it doesn't matter, right? And the fives are, very specific to India based on the current context. So I live there. And the seventh chapter and the last chapter is a futuristic, in the sense many things are happening. If you see a sustainable public procurement, we started sometime in 1990s, and but now every other day we start thinking, how can we apply procurement thinking to solve a particular problem? Say, for example, if I remember correctly, like before 2012 or before 2010, nobody talked about how do you apply procurement to solve the decarbonization or to achieve the climate goals. But the moment Paris climate we signed Paris climate deal, suddenly we started talking about how procurement could be used to deliver climate goals. Then again, in a similar fashion, circular economy concept came into, and it has become again becoming a very mainstream concept. So again, we have started talking about how can we use procurement, our power of procurement to deliver circularity. And again, there are a lot of experiment going on in other parts of the world. Like, say, for example, some of the people are trying how do you use procurement to reduce AMI, antimicrobial resistance. How do you use procurement in the tourism sector? How do you use procurement in the food procurement, right? How do you use procurement in some other sector? So a lot of things are happening. So I have talked about that. Then in that chapter, I have also talked about how sustainable procurement and trades are interrelated, whether the international GPA agreement, WTO GPA agreement, facilitate or hinders the sustainable public procurement. That I have talked about. I have also talked about, there are a lot of talk about digitization, the blockchain, IoT, and so on, right? So how digitization of procurement, or how this new technology are going to help sustainability and especially public procurement. So one thing is certain, that when you use combination of technology, something like blockchain, IoT together, so it improves your traceability in the supply chain. So that way it is very helpful. But again, I've gone to the number of attempts people have taken to use this technology for enhancing the sustainability. If you see in the public sectors, so there's a report of European Union. They have also done studies, and they found that although we are talking a lot about this technology, fourth industrial revolution, and so on, but it's not happening much. So we still have to wait for some time to get this technology mature and to be used in the procurement system. We can reap those benefits. So all put together, these seven chapters talks about sustainable public procurement.
That's amazing, Sanjay. I could talk about this all night, but there's a couple of kind of key points that came out of what you were saying to me. You talked in the early chapters about India and the reasons to do sustainable procurement. And I think that's so important. I think we all need a reason to do whatever we do. I did a bit of early work when we were doing BS 8903 and then ISO 2400 around, you start with the drivers, you start with why. So obviously you've done your work, you've looked at various different places, you've looked at China, and then you focused on India. What reasons does India have to do sustainable public procurement? What were your conclusions?
So, there are many reasons. If you look, if you look at the way we have gone economically in the last 30 years, it's quite impressive in the sense, if you look at the GDP, we have been growing at the rate of roughly about 7% per annum, which is a huge for the large economy, just next to China. So it's huge. And this GDP has helped lift millions of people out of poverty line. But it has consequences as well, because while growing, we have not taken care of things which ideally we should have been. So as a result, what has happened in many of the indicators, social indicators, plus environmental indicators, we are behind. And any government, be it India, be it China, or some countries in Africa or Asia, everybody wants that the quality of living should improve. Everybody wants that, right? So for that, you need resources, right? To improve the quality of life. It is estimated that you need roughly about 14 ton per annum of, all kind of resources put together, biomass, metal, non-metal, etc., etc. But resources is limited on the earth by simple fact that we have only one earth. So if everybody wants to go per capita, one person could be allocated is roughly 8 ton per of resources per annum, not more than that. So you have a limitations. So the challenge is how do you lift the quality of living of your people? And at the same time, you are not able to generate waste. Many of the rivers in India have become very toxic. Many of the ponds have dried up. We have many of the cities in India are water stressed. In coming 10 years, we will not have water. We have a huge problem with the e-waste, right? We have a huge problem with the solid waste. And AIL Center for Environment, they publish yearly report on how well we are doing in terms of environment. And sadly, India is almost at the bottom. So these are the sad realities. So there is a solid case of integrating sustainability into the procurement decision, because if you want to grow, and as I said, like in terms of economy, we have gone and we are shoulder to shoulder with, say, UK or with the France, somewhere 5-6 position in terms of GDP. But if you look at in terms of social indices, we are way behind. So if you want to catch up with the world in terms of quality of life, and if you want to secure the life of people, your own people, then you need to think about how we are spending. When we spend so much of money on procurement of works and goods and services, then why can't we use this? If the other countries, those who have matured today, they started their journey 10, 15 years back, and they have been able to learning, relearning. Sometimes they have faced with the failure, but again learned it and they have gone ahead. So why can't we do that?
Just moving on then, Sanjay, to one final point that you made in the later chapters of your book, and something again that really resonates with me about collaboration. And as you know, before we switched the recording on, we were talking about the 10th anniversary of the Supply Chain Sustainability School in the UK, which is all about collaboration. I guess what I'm seeing now, and you mentioned, net zero, carbon neutral, blah blah, whatever we're going to call it. I don't think anybody knows. I don't think any organization in the world knows how they're going to achieve net zero carbon. And so therefore, we're going to need to do it together. It's to your point about needing to work together in collaboration with our suppliers, maybe rather than the old way that we used to do things, where you tell the supplier what you want and they deliver it, and you beat them up and you get the best price, and that's procurement. How do you see the procurement profession changing? What new skills do we need if we're going to move from, sort of a transactional view of procurement to do you know what? We've got these massive challenges that you've described in social and environmental impacts that we must work together with our suppliers to do. What does tomorrow's procurement professional look like to you?
Challenge for the procurement professionals is engaging in the sense, if you look at today, right, sustainability to them as a procurement professional, they are as good or as bad as common people. Somebody has the interest in sustainability, they learn, they adapt. But if somebody doesn't have, they don't, right? So the biggest challenge for the procurement profession is to gain this learning about the sustainability, which is very important for them. And the second point is very important for working for the future is again collaboration, right? I'm sure no procurement professional could become as proficient as sustainability professional. And that is, sustainability is their profession, right? So learn to collaborate with them because we cannot do it. Because if you think that as a procurement professional, I will learn everything, it's not going to happen, right? So one of the key skill set which will require for implementing sustainability or for the future procurement professional is to learn to collaborate. If you especially look at in the public sectors, right? So relationship with the vendors is very transactional. Just one purchase, one order gone. For the next purchase, again, we start from the scratch. So if we continue doing this way, we are never going to achieve the scope 3 emission and carbon neutral and so on, whatever we are talking. So there again, collaboration come into the picture. We need to adopt how do we engage with the vendors. Still, we don't know. Today, if you ask me, I don't know how to collaborate with the vendors. Being in the public sector for the last 20, 25 years, I don't know. And at the same time, the regulation and ecosystem has to be made in such a way that allows for the collaboration to happen. How we are going to move from the transactional relationship to the long-term relationship with the vendors, that has to come, right? And that flexibility need to be given to the people who are working at the ground level, right? So, and that will come from the regulation. And for that, a lot of things are required. Policy has to change. Policymaker has to think about it. That sustainability is a long-term game, right? And unless we become quick and we learn about how to play the long-term game, we will not be able to achieve sustainability. So collaboration and thinking long-term. These two are the important skills any procurement professional will have to adopt to be successful in the future. Thank you.
Brilliant. Collaboration and thinking long term. I think we couldn't have ended on a better note than that, Sanjay. That's fantastic. Thank you. I think it's been great to hear from you about your book, and congratulations on finishing it, because it's a tremendous effort to actually write a whole book. So do let us know when it's published, and we'll talk to everybody about it, because I think it's going to be an essential read for tomorrow's procurement professionals. So Sanjay, it's been a pleasure as always. Thank you very much for talking to us, and we'll be in touch again very soon. So thanks very much, everybody, for listening to myself and Sanjay. I hope you found his points really insightful, and look forward to the publication of his book. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Son, and I will keep you posted on when the book comes, the e-version.
Yeah, please do. Thank you for listening to Sense and Sustainability, your podcast for sustainable supply chains. Do visit our website, iso2400.org, for more information.